During aerobic exercise, the body needs to be efficient at using oxygen. As a result of training, the body will adapt to mostly have a certain type of fibre. After weeks of aerobic training, an endurance athlete will adapt to having more slow oxidative fibres because they can be used repeatedly over long periods of time. These fibres are more resistant to fatigue because they use oxygen to make energy. This will enable them to keep on exercising at the same level of performance throughout the race. For instance, Sun Yang will have done lots of aerobic training, which means he has loads of slow oxidative fibres, which would allow him to hold mid 58 seconds throughout his 1500 metre swim per 100 metres. Another adaptation that occurs from aerobic training is myoglobin stores increase and more mitochondria are produced. Myoglobin is where the oxygen is stored in the muscles. Mitochondria is where anaerobic glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain create energy. If there are more and larger myoglobin stores, then there will be more oxygen which is available for the muscles to use. If there are more mitochondria, then more aerobic metabolism will take place, which provides the body with more energy. This is a benefit to an athlete because they have more oxygen and more places that are creating energy. The number of mitochondria increases from aerobic exercise, enabling more aerobic metabolism to take place. This allows the muscle to create more ATP, and this means that less lactic acid is produced when you work below the lactate threshold. This brings about an improvement in performance. By exercising aerobically, the enzymes that produce ATP increase and make more ATP, which improves the endurance of the aerobic energy system. This means the athlete can work harder for longer without fatiguing. The body becomes more able to use triglycerides as a fuel for the muscle rather than glycogen. The athlete will have more energy because they'll be using two fuel sources rather than one, which will mean that they can exercise for longer. Marathon runners train their bodies to use glycogen sparing to preserve glycogen stores, because energy from glycogen can be created relatively quickly and easily in comparison to triglycerides. It can also be used as a fuel for the anaerobic energy system. In your muscles, a buildup of lactic acid can inhibit glycolysis, the breakdown of glycogen into glucose, which is the main fuel for creating energy. The enzyme which breaks down the fuel glycogen becomes denatured, and this means that they don't work as effectively, so energy is produced at a slower rate. The graph shows lactate accumulation before and after a series of weeks of training. At 8 km an hour, the blue line is at 2.7 millimoles of lactate, whereas the red line is at a lower 2 millimoles. The blue line gradually increases until it hits its OBLA at 12 km an hour. After weeks of training, the red line hits OBLA later when they reach 13 km an hour, so the athlete has achieved the lactate tolerance adaptation. From there, both lines rapidly increase until they can't go any further. By doing aerobic training, an athlete can increase their lactate tolerance and delay the onset of OBLA. The adaptation helps the athlete to train and perform at higher intensities for longer. For instance, in swimming, we train many hours a week over a period of years to make our lactate tolerance greater so that when we do a race, we produce less lactic acid, which improves performance. In the 1500, I can now swim at a high intensity before I hit my lactate threshold, which allows me to swim faster at a faster pace and PB. Weight-bearing aerobic training, such as walking, jogging, and climbing stairs, brings skeletal adaptations by increasing bone mass and strength. This is very important, particularly for teenagers who are building bone mass, and for older people whose bone mass starts to deplete in their 40s. Regular exercise can prevent osteoporosis, and it can help to improve life for people who have osteoporosis. Anaerobic exercise leads to hypertrophy, which is an increase in the muscle fiber size, and hyperplasia, which is an increase in the number of fast glycolytic fibers. Resistant training increases the size of the fast glycolytic muscle mass by increasing the number of myofibrils and connective tissues. This increases the proportion of muscle to body fat and makes the athlete stronger and more powerful. If you're a swimmer whose best event is sprints, Training in the gym is essential for producing the bigger muscles which give you more power that you need to swim fast. Men experience more muscular hypertrophy than women because they have more of the hormone testosterone, which is a major growth hormone. Fast glycolytic fibers are good for sprints. They have few mitochondria and high levels of glycogen and enzymes that are necessary to produce energy without using oxygen. They are good for sprint events such as a 50 and 100 meter sprint in swimming. Fast oxidative glycolytic fibers, or FOG fibers, are the same as fast glycolytic, but they have oxidative enzymes, so they are good at working anaerobically and aerobically. They last for longer sprints such as 200-meter freestyle and 400-meter freestyles, where you are working anaerobically for as long as possible, and then you have to work aerobically towards the end. Another adaptation of anaerobic exercise is an increase in tendon strength. For athletes, their skeletal muscles become bigger, stronger, and more efficient. The athlete is stronger, less likely to get injured, and is able to perform movements much easier than someone who is weaker. For instance, when you throw a javelin, you're exerting a large amount of force, which is dependent on strength and power. Your tendons need to be strong enough not to tear. Another anaerobic adaptation to exercise is in the neuromuscular system is improving the speed at which the proprioceptors detect change and react to it. The muscle spindles are connected to ligaments which contain small cells called proprioceptors, and these are connected to the central nervous system and are the body's way of communicating. The more and faster acting proprioceptors help with coordination in sport. For instance, moving your arm to receive or direct a ball in tennis. Over a long period of time, the body creates cellular adaptations, modifications of neurotransmitters, alterations in reflexes, chemical and biomechanical responses. This is achieved by taking part in high intensity, short duration activities. This would lead to an improved performance in swimming because it would decrease the reaction time off the blocks at the beginning of the race. The adaptation of force generation is achieved with anaerobic exercise by increasing the number of motor units which respond simultaneously to improve force production. Neural pathways become quicker at transmitting impulses and activating synergistic muscles to produce force. By doing plyometric training, swimmers can increase explosive power in the water because they have made their neurotransmitters faster. By exercising anaerobically, the enzyme activity increases, which makes the ATP-PC system more efficient. This helps improve the capacity of the ATP-PC energy system, which helps during strength, speed, and power performances. You can achieve an adaptation to your ATP and PC stores by doing anaerobic training and taking phosphocreatine supplements. An untrained athlete might have lower phosphocreatine stores than an athlete who trains every day for sprint events. Because the trained athlete has larger stores, they can use their ATP-PC system for longer than an untrained athlete. The difference between the two won't be huge, about 1 or 2 seconds worth, but over a 200 meter sprint, 1 or 2 seconds will make a huge difference to their performance because they'll be able to put off using their lactic acid system for longer. They want to stay in the ATP-PC system for as long as possible because it doesn't have any harmful byproducts. Once you start using your lactic acid system, your body produces the waste product lactate, which accumulates and causes fatigue, which affects sporting performance. In order to combat creatine depletion, phosphocreatine can be consumed in natural sources such as meat, fish, and nuts, and the liver and kidneys produce it. However, athletes can also take special creatine supplements which replenish stores and allow the athlete to perform to their best. Creatine is taken by supplements and is mainly used for sports that require short, powerful bursts such as weightlifting and bodybuilding. There are side effects of taking supplements such as stomachache and diarrhea. Also, your body can stop internally producing creatine if it gets used to having the supplement. Another adaptation of the anaerobic energy system is the body becomes more efficient at buffering lactic acid. By buffering the levels of lactic acid, the body can put off hitting OBLA, which will negatively reduce performance. more hydrogen carbonate ions will be flowing around the body in the blood, neutralizing the lactic acid. Due to weeks of training, a person's basal metabolic rate will increase. This means that their body burns more calories at rest, so when they are active, they are able to consume more calories, which are required to exercise. The graph shows the Wingate test of pre- and post-exercise program data. The test involves cycling maximally for 30 seconds. The pre-data shows that the person's peak power output was 13 watts per kilogram. They then begin to fatigue rapidly. By halfway, their fatigue index was 60%. From there onwards, they kept on fatiguing, and by the full 30 seconds, they had fatigued by 115%. They got a relatively high peak power output, but fatigued very quickly because they were well into their OBLA, which meant that they had lots of lactic acid build-up. After they had done several weeks of training, their peak power output was 14 watts per kilogram, which was an increase. From there, they began to fatigue at a rapid rate, but not as much as before they did the training. At halfway, their fatigue index was 55%, and at the 30-second mark, their fatigue index was 70%. This is a dramatic improvement because they didn't produce nearly as much lactic acid, so they didn't fatigue nearly as much. The best exercise for achieving skeletal adaptations is weight-bearing exercise, such as weightlifting, running, and plyometrics. Plyometrics is an exercise that makes us more powerful by, for instance, doing box jumps. The adaptation you can achieve by doing anaerobic exercise include increasing calcium stores, which are used for the sliding filament theory, An increase in calcium results in the athlete being able to create more muscular contractions, which helps the athlete to fatigue at a slower rate. We can also achieve an increase in tendon strength and ligament stretch from anaerobic exercise. The effect of this is that we are more efficient at contracting muscles and the stretch of the ligament is increased. This helps to prevent injury and also increases the range of movement, which helps to improve performance. For instance, because I have flexible shoulders, I can achieve a longer stroke in freestyle swimming. When we exercise, our muscles contract against the bone, and the bone becomes stronger through a process called remodeling. Cells called osteoclasts break down old bone, and cells called osteoblasts replace it with new tissue to make it denser and stronger. The bones become stronger because of proteins that form a matrix between the bone cells, and this is called calcification. This leads to bone growth in the axial skeleton, vertebral column, ribs, skull, and sternum, and the appendicular skeleton, shoulders, hips, and pelvis. Cartilage is important for our joints because it acts as a shock absorber and helps our joints to move easily. Cartilage does not have its own blood supply. It depends on diffusion from oxygen and nutrients from synovial fluid, and this diffusion happens when the joint moves during exercise. Exercise increases cartilage thickness, but overuse can lead to injury because the bone gets eroded, and this can lead to osteoarthritis. Anaerobic exercise leads to an increase in ventilation, which means that more CO2 can be exhaled and more oxygen can be inspired into the lungs. For instance, sprint training in swimming requires you to hold your breath for as long as possible, and you gradually experience an increase in ventilation. Because I am used to holding my breath beyond my comfort zone in training, my performance in a sprint race has improved, meaning that I can swim faster and I can use my anaerobic system for longer. Anaerobic training increases the strength and size of the intercostal muscles. The stronger the intercostal muscles, the more air can be forced in and out of the lungs. If there is more air in the lungs, then there is more oxygen available to be picked up by hemoglobin. Anaerobic exercise puts the heart under stress, which results in cardiovascular adaptations such as an increase in cardiac hypertrophy, stroke volume, cardiac output, and a decrease in resting heart rate and blood pressure. As a result of these adaptations, an athlete's rate of recovery improves because they can expel more waste products efficiently.